Man, I don't care what nobody say, man. I did my thing on that goddamn bump, G. That shit goes so hard. I love my own work so bad.
I ain't gonna lie. I was thinking about that. I was like, that's dope.
Yeah, no, me. Once again, I'm always gonna shout out my cousin, man, at the Irregular Podcast. Shout out Okuchi, shout out the team, man. We actually produced that one time when I was at home in Chicago, because I was like, man, I need a theme song or something to the podcast. And then we banged it out. But good people, great people, God's people. How y'all doing today? Thank y'all for joining me for another episode of The Antidote. And here with me, I have one of the most controversial, one of the most thoroughly theological. This brother is from Alabama A&M, but we're going to talk about that a little bit later.
You see the pen. You see the pen on the lapel. I have to bring it out.
Shout out to the HBCUs, man.
Absolutely.
But, Brother Christian A. Smith, I don't think I did you enough justice. Would you like to introduce yourself and what it is that you do?
Yeah, what's up, everybody? I'm glad to be here with Odie. Glad we connected about 1.5 years back on TikTok. And has just been a real cool relationship. Learned a lot from each other in the areas that we operate. I'm a church kid. I lead a digital community of faith. And where Odie and I first connected was I had him on my podcast, Holy Smoke, Cigars and Spirituality. We talked about therapy for Black men on that episode. It was an amazing time. But yeah, I help people deconstruct harmful theology and build beloved community. That's what I do. And I'm just glad to be here, man.
Most definitely. And you're right. That episode was a vibe. It was extremely needed. It was crazy because at the time I was in Miami and it was just like, it was the great start to the weekend, man. That's a great start to the weekend. So before me and Christian even came on my particular podcast, what I like to do with my guests is I like to have pre-podcast meetings, right? And in our meeting, we covered a lot of different topics, like a lot, because the meetings are only 30 minutes long because, you know, we got stuff to do, we adults, stuff like that, right? We covered like almost 4 or 5 topics in the span of 30 minutes, and all of them just kept interloping, right? They kept overlapping in such a way where the origin of this entire conversation was how it is that we have learned to perceive God, or how it is that we have learned to identify with what God is or who God is, and how it is that that moves into the sociopolitics of not only just the community overall, but specifically the Black community, right? So, Christian, in your space of deconstructing theology, harmful theology, right?
Yeah.
What does that look like in the space of challenging the conventions of the Black church? Let's start there specifically.
Yeah. So I always start people in my context on their relationship with the Bible, because the Black church has a codependent relationship with the Bible. Like we see it as God, but we imbue the power onto the Bible that it has. So it's like this codependent relationship. We feel like we're dependent on the Bible, and really the Bible is dependent on us for the type of authority that it has over our lives. We give it that kind of authority. So when I have conversations with people about how we reimagine our theology, even getting into conversations about the gender of God, I start with, where do we place our authority? Because most people in my context place their authority in their understanding of the Bible. So based on that, they just automatically identify with God as a man, because that's what their church told them the Bible says, that God is a man. And really, they're not so married to the Bible. They're married to their doctrine under the guise of biblical authority. Like, because the Bible itself says God is not a man. I mean, the Bible says that God is not a man, and when you keep reading it, it says God is not a man that he should lie, nor the son of man that he should repent. So the Bible itself says God is not a man. And depending on how you look at that, right? When you go into the original language where it says God is not a man in the Hebrew, there are two ways you could look at that. Does that mean God is not a man like male, or God is not a man like a human? Right. The actual Hebrew term there means God is not a human.
Right.
So that tells us that even the biblical authors could not identify the species of God.
Right.
So if we can identify the species, how do we know the gender? So yeah.
Brother, I've had that same type of conversation with so many people, right? It's like I was having a conversation yesterday because my supervisor, shout out for being services, man. But my supervisor, he was like, because I was telling him this story about how it is that I almost accidentally got baptized, and
get baptized.
So dog, we was at the church, right? Because my cousins, they're Seventh-day Adventists. We was at the church, and the pastor was like, "Hey, who want to get baptized?" And I was like, "I ain't never been baptized before. All of my friends talk about it. I want to get baptized, right?" So apparently, I needed something like a permission slip or something like that.
Yeah.
I go home, and I was like, "Mom," she's like, "Yes, William." I said, "Can I get baptized?" And she looked at me. She's like, "William, what are you talking about? Can I get baptized?" "William, why you want to get baptized?" "Because I hear my friends in school talk about how they was baptized. I want to get baptized too." My mother was like, "William, I need you to go look up what a baptism is, what it means, and what it signifies." I did it. I no longer wanted to get baptized because I felt like I needed space to make mistakes in my life that I had not yet made. And dedicating my life to entire holy doctrine at the tender age of 10. I was like, I don't know if I'm ready for them responsibilities. You dig what I'm saying?
I feel you.
Well, I was having a conversation with my supervisor. He was like, "Will, what is your, religion?" I was like, "I'm an omniist. I'm a universalist, right? I believe that every doctrine has some type of truth to it, and that each one of those doctrines, if it has a path to God, that's not the wrong path, right? Mm-hmm. Because if it were, then it wouldn't be written. You dig what I'm saying?" Mm-hmm. So for me, the way that I break it down in one sentence is that you can tell me what God does, but once you start trying to tell me who God is, I start to get a little chafy, right?
And I don't mind if you tell me who God is to you, but don't tell me who God got to be to me. That's where I draw the line. I would love to know who God is to you, but when you start trying to dictate it that your God got to show up the same way for me, and it's like, nah, I don't get with that.
Right? Because I feel like at that point, one, that's indoctrination, but also two, that's a particular type of legality. Absolutely. Right? Because when we talk about law, and when we talk about how it is that law is disseminated, how it is that law is built and constructed, a lot of us in the United States believe that law is they say that there should be a separation between the church and the state. And there is not, right? But that separation between church and the state, especially in a space like the United States, is impossible. The reason being is because a lot of the ways in which we inflict, or a lot of the ways in which we implement legality, morality, things of that nature are based upon either biblical or Judeo-Christian ideologies, right? Absolutely. So I want to talk a little bit more about that, right? The idea of, and once again, the sociopolitics of a gendered God, because I'm always going to shout out this book whenever I talk about, you know what I'm saying, gendered God. So Pastor LaVon Briggs, in her book Sensual Faith, brother, if you ain't read that book, I need you to read that book.
All right, bet.
It's called Sensual Faith by LaVon Briggs. It's a very powerful book. You know what I'm saying? In that book, she literally talks about the politics and the sociopolitics of a male God within the church, and how it is that impacts the hierarchies within the church, right? Yeah. How it is that it impacts or blurs the line between the mediators of God, the messengers of God, and the masochists of God, if you want me to be very honest, right?
Mhm.
It is this idea that the power that I have, and thus the way it is that my masculinity is constructed, is based upon my ability to mirror the behaviors of this male gendered God, or at the very least, how it is that we have been taught or instructed that this God is.
Yeah.
Right? What are your thoughts about that, brother?
For me, it's all culture. You know, theology and culture go hand in hand. And we pray in Black churches, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So what we're saying is we're trying to create our version of heaven here.
Mm.
So when we construct in our churches a version of heaven, it's generally male dominated in positions of power.
Mm-hmm.
And we have women who do the majority of the work.
Mm-hmm.
So that is a reflection of the heaven that we've created.
Right.
And so it plays out in the hierarchical structures of our ministries. We're reflecting what we think heaven looks like. That's really what it comes down to. If we were to create a heaven on earth, what would it look like? In the eyes of a lot of Black church folk, it looks like men being in charge, making the decisions, and women complimenting us. Gay people, it's either don't ask, don't tell, or just don't even be here. Like, we create what we believe heaven is.
Mm-hmm.
And our idea of this male God who can only be male, because see, I don't have a problem with a male God. This one guy can only be male.
Mm-hmm.
Because some people relate to a male God. But what that does and the way that plays out in our churches is you have this expectation that men are supposed to be in charge and run things just based on the fact that we got a penis.
Mm-hmm.
And it winds up being so incredibly devastating for our people because we're so much more diverse as a people. We have leaders who identify in all ways. We have thinkers who identify in all ways. We have powerful people who identify in all ways. Like we can't downplay how God moves through somebody like Angela Davis.
Mm.
We can't downplay that. We can't downplay how God moves through somebody like Audre Lorde. We can't downplay that.
That's facts.
But in the Black church, it's so patriarchal, we don't give space for that type of brilliance to shine simply because of this hierarchy that we have of men and women.
I definitely agree with that. And I think, so a couple things, right?
Mm-hmm.
The first one is the culture of the hierarchy that we're talking about, right? In the house of God, this is how things should exist. This is how things should, be implemented. This is how things should be, right? And when we're looking at it from that perspective, because once again, in her book, Sensual Faith, Lavon Briggs talks about how it is that Pastor Lavon Briggs talks about how it is that in those spaces, this is the reason why the protection of women just goes completely left. Mm-hmm. Because there's more concern about obedience and consumption than there is about accountability and, once again, practicing what you preach,
mm-hmm.
right? And I believe that in our previous podcast conversation, we talked about how it is that culture translates into not only just the church house, but the secular house, right? Yeah. How it is that we as men have been, cajoled into believing that there is some holy ordinance that says that we are supposed to be the undeniable and the unshakable leaders in our homes, in the social sphere, in these other places, that, it's not something that should be questioned, or it's not something that should be, deconstructed is not something that should even be approached, or you incur the wrath of God through the hands of men. So what are your thoughts about that, brother?
As you were talking, I was thinking about the emphasis in the secular space, so outside of the church. And I don't really believe there is a separation between the sacred and the secular other than the ones that we create. I think naturally sacred and secular flow together. I believe when we look into some of our, Pan-African roots, we see that merge of sacred and secular. We are just spiritual people everywhere, and it shows up. And in my community of faith, that's what we find. It doesn't matter what we're talking about. There can be sacred and secular mixed all in there. But in terms of how we have formulated our faith communities and how we have formulated our organizational structures and doctrines, it mirrors the culture. It mirrors the capitalist society in which we inhabit, where there is a greater concern for law and order than there is justice and peace. Right. So
hold on, wait. I want you to break that down a little bit, because I don't want people to miss that. You said there is a greater desire for law and order than justice and peace.
Yes. Because law and order maintains the status quo. Whoever is currently in power, law and order keeps them in power. Right. So and we have been conditioned to confuse legality with morality.
Yes.
But all of my heroes have extensive rap sheets. They did a lot of illegal things, but they weren't doing immoral things. They were doing the illegal work of justice and liberation. And that's how our society is framed, this white supremacist capitalist society in which we operate. And then Black folk created our own Black spaces, and we mirrored that.
Yes, sir.
So we mirror it in how men lord over women. We mirror it in how straight people beat down on queer people. So we're more concerned with the legality that is done right, is done the way it's always been done, than how do we do right by people? Instead of how do we do it right, how do we do right by people? And if we don't ever make that switch, I don't know what's going to happen to the Black church, to be perfectly honest. I don't know what's going to happen to Black people, because like we're so fractured because we ignore these patriarchal power dynamics. So like we have to address these power dynamics so that we can come together and really support each other and create coalitions that can really, really have an impact in the world. But if we keep all this infighting because men need a male God to lord over women, and then women are so indoctrinated to believe in the male God too, that they perpetuate the patriarchy that keeps them bound. Because I had to work with a lot of women on seeing themselves in the divine and seeing the divine in themselves. Like I've had women who've really, really struggled with identifying with God with feminine pronouns. And I'm like, why? Like, tell me why. Let's talk about that. Right? Because if you have an issue with referring to God with feminine pronouns, that doesn't tell me how highly you think of God. That tells me how lowly you think of femininity. So let's unpack that. When that goes back to the deconstructing harmful theology, you have blocked yourself from seeing God in you based on this semantics thing that we do in creating these hierarchies.
I agree with that. Most definitely. And I think that from the space of, once again, how it is that I deconstruct masculinity and how it is that we identify the core tenets of masculinity and where they come from. So I really believe that we overlook, and when I say overlook, because we as an American society have moved away from, whether it be churches, spirituality, in the Judeo-Christian dynamic, what have you, I think that at times we overlook how it is that, once again, identifying God as a male, or identifying the maleness of God and not the potential femaleness or the real femaleness of God, continues to create that power distortion, right? And within the Black community specifically, I think that for a number of Black men, because they were faced externally with the inability to access the resources and the structures that white men controlled, once again through biblical or spiritual inclinations, because most folks don't understand that the way that white privilege was created and the distinction between indentured servants and Black people was Christianity. Right? If you were a Christian and you were white, you got access to these particular powers and privileges. But if you were anything else, or you were Black, you did not get these same accesses to these privileges. This is the reason why white Judeo-Christians are able to navigate through the sociological sphere in ways that other people are not. Like pagans, Wiccans, all of these different people, they're not looked at the same as other white people because they practice an earth-based or a feminine-based religion, right? It is not about the idea of worshiping a man or worshiping an idol. It's the idea of creating balance within the environment that you are in, but also recognizing how it is that these balances are internal and external, right? So going back to this sociological idea of masculinity that Black men mirrored from white sociological spaces, do you believe that there is a connection between how the Black church functions and how it is that Black men construct their masculinity?
Absolutely.
Do you believe that it's up now in the same way?
I'm processing what you just asked me. There's absolutely a connection between the way the Black church functions and the way Black men conceptualize our masculinity. It's not a connection I've thought about deeply prior to this very moment. But it definitely still plays into it. The pastor traditionally was one of the most influential positions in the Black community, because the pastor was one of the few people who wasn't dependent on white people for their livelihood. So that gave us a certain level of liberty with our voices. You know, because when I'm not dependent on you for my money, I don't give a damn what you think about me. You ain't putting no food on my table. You know what I'm saying? So there was something to that. But somewhere along the line, we bought into this vengeful, wrathful God that we are supposed to reflect. And we became intoxicated with the wealth of our white counterparts, the power of our white counterparts, the immunity of our white counterparts. And we just duplicated that in far too many instances. And I'm not saying that across the board. Let me be the first to say, I am a pastor, right? So when I critique Black church and pastors and all of this stuff, like I am a part of that group, in the same way that Jesus had the harshest critiques for the Pharisees because he was a Pharisee. He knew them so well. Like I know this so well because I was raised in it. But yeah, there is a pursuit of that proximity to power, and the way it plays up on our masculinity is really vicious. because it doesn't leave us any room to be soft. It doesn't leave us any room to have nuance.
Mm.
It doesn't leave us any room to feel unless we're angry or we're happy. But we don't get to be perplexed. We don't get to be sad. We don't get to be confused. Like we don't get to be, we're not allowed to let our feelings be hurt.
Mm.
You know, and that chips away at your humanity over time.
Of course.
But that's what masculinity requires of us. So if we try to take the emotionality out of the divine, then we'll reflect that. Those are my thoughts. And like I said, I just, I hadn't thought about that. And, it's probably something I can flesh out more later, but that's just what comes to me right now.
Oh, no, most definitely, brother. Because, these are the things that I started identifying. I'm not going to say very early in my life, but I would say around about my teens, mid-20s. So one of the points that I brought up with one of my friends was that when we talk about the parallels of masculinity and Judeo-Christian spirituality, like, for example, the immunity, right? That's the reason why I said, ooh, when you said the word immunity, because it's like the first thing that came to my mind is that a number of men do not like being questioned.
Yeah, right.
A number of men do not like being examined.
Yeah.
A number of men do not like being called to altar or called to task. Why? Because that don't happen to God.
Right.
You don't question God.
Right.
You don't, like, what? It's immediate obedience or nothing.
And that's the hierarchy, right? I don't answer to you because you're beneath me. I answer to God.
The only person I submit to is God. Even though in the Bible, it says for men to submit to their wives and to love their wives as Christ did what? Love the church.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a mutual submission.
It is a mutual submission, right? So that immunity, right? That the martyrdom, right? Being able to bear these loads like Jesus bared the cross, right?
Yeah.
And being able to walk or being able to move like this is my cross to bear. These tenets or these visualizations or symbolisms of masculinity, I can almost immediately when I see them or when I hear them, draw the parallels. So even when we're talking about women contextualizing themselves through the patriarchy, through the church, right? I was having a conversation with my friend. I was like, yo, did you notice that? So when you say Jehovah Jireh and the rest of the Jehovah's names with the dash, so Jehovah Jireh, I can't ever recall all of them, but
it's a lot of them.
It's a lot of them. But have you noticed that all of these are adjectives that women use to describe their ideal man?
Shoot, I'd have to go back and review them. I know Jehovah Jireh is provider, so definitely that one. What are the rest of them? Like, so, I know Jehovah Nisi, Jehovah Tiskanu, but I don't remember what all they represent.
Nah, I'm gonna see if I can find them real quick. Because if I can find them, it's on and popping.
Yeah, I'm mad curious. That while you looking that up, that whole martyrdom piece. Oh, yeah. I got a point about that martyrdom piece because I was having a conversation with somebody that I really, really admire and respect, and they were speaking well of me. They were encouraging me, like telling me how much they appreciated what I do, and they compared some of my work to MLK and Malcolm X, and I was like, yo, you got to stop comparing me to niggas that got assassinated. Like, I'm sorry, that is not my journey.
That is not my ministry.
Like,
I'm trying to be here as long as I can.
I really do appreciate the work of people like MLK and Malcolm X and Fred Hampton. Fred Hampton is one of my heroes. But when it comes to martyrdom, consider me Stokley Carmichael, right? Because Stokley Carmichael knew when to get the hell out of here.
Yes,
And
sir.
he was a contemporary of all of these guys, and he knew to get out of here. He moved to Africa. He changed his name, and he lived to a ripe old age.
Yes, he
So
did.
so you know that martyrdom piece, like, I'm trying to live my life. I want to help people along the way, but I'm trying to live my life.
1,000%. 1,000. Actually, it's very interesting. So back when I once again was constructing my masculinity, I was getting into a lot of the the revolutionary works. And my mother, she came to me and she said, William, what do you recognize about all of these men that you are beginning to admire? And I looked, and it took me a minute. I said, they're all dead. She said, are you ready to die for what it is that you believe in? And I was thinking about it in the kitchen while I was making my breakfast. I was like, why is it that the black male masculine trajectory has to be quantified, or the level of masculinity has to be quantified by how much trauma you can take without saying anything?
Yeah, I'm good.
Like,
I'm good, bro.
why is that necessary?
I'm good.
Why do I have to be, or why do I have to take on the burdens of? And I'm not saying that I'm not willing to do so. What I'm saying is that why is that a necessity to define my masculinity?
Our theology reinforces that too. Like, so I know you didn't come up in the black church like I did, but it saturates our community though. Even when we don't grow up in the same faith traditions, it saturates our communities in many different ways. And we practice in many settings a theology of suffering.
Yes, we do.
It is our suffering is what connects us to the divine in these rule-keeping theological spaces. So however much you can suffer, like the people who can suffer the most, the people who can put up with the most, those are the ones who are really close to God. Mm-hmm. So it gives us this complex where we live miserable lives and we feel like misery is our connection to God. And I call bullshit. I call complete, utter bullshit. I am not going to measure my connection to the divine by how much I can suffer. But people expect that, especially when we're in leadership. Oh, you just gotta hang in there. You just gotta, just like, people are gonna, they're eventually they're gonna get like, no, I'm setting boundaries now. Kiss my ass. No,
I ain't dealing with none of that shit.
No.
And it's crazy because I also believe that that's how it is that black women develop this connection, or in the past have developed this connection to struggle love.
Yes.
Right? It's like, I gotta struggle through this, I gotta go through this, I gotta, like, no, you don't.
Yeah.
You do not, right? You do not have to, because I think when we say that, what a lot of men hear is that, oh, she's just gonna come in for my money. No. If you are going to be the leader, if you are going to engage in this dynamic, you have to be able to navigate in such a way where resources are allocated and placed properly enough to meet the needs of both you and this woman, right? Mm-hmm. Whatever those things may be. And I'm not saying that you gotta, once again, hyperextend yourself, because that's a lack of boundaries as well. Because you constantly are believing that, once again, you have to be this protector, this provider, this. Oh, by the way, I found the list of names because I'm a researcher. So
right.
It's Lord God Almighty. That's El Shaddai. Elyon is the Most High. Adonai is Lord Master. Yahweh is Lord Jehovah. Jehovah Nisi is the Lord my banner. Jehovah Ra is the Lord my shepherd. Jehovah Rapha is the Lord that heals. Yeah. Jehovah Shammah is the Lord that's there. Jehovah Sikinu is the Lord of our righteousness. Jehovah, I'm not even going to try to pronounce this one, is the Lord who sanctifies you. El Olam is the everlasting God. Elohim is God. Kana is jealous. Jehovah Jireh is the Lord will provide. Jehovah Shalom is the Lord of peace. And Jehovah Shabbath is the Lord of hosts.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So once again, all of these things being like, once again, when you say, I want a man to lead, that's a shepherd. right? I want this man to be emotionally intelligent, to be able to hold space for me. That's somebody who is healing and who's there. I want an upstanding man. That's somebody who's righteous. I want somebody who's going to bring me through, once again, whatever it is that I'm experiencing. That's somebody who's sanctifying me, right? The everlasting God, right? You want some women enjoy a man who's going to get upset if another man is in their space, right? That's a jealous God, right? I want my man to be peaceful. That's a peaceful God, right? I want my man to, I want my man to be approachable. That's a Lord of hosts, right? So once again, I've broken down multiple times how it is that we as men at times respond to the cause of the patriarchy through women who uphold the patriarchy, because we have been taught internally that the patriarchy, or how it is that we move through the patriarchy, is the appropriate way to engage in masculinity. And I'm like, they're not one and the same.
And the reality is those characteristics or attributes of Jehovah, like those should apply to people in general. There are so many things that we tie to what a man should be that really just a mature adult should be, regardless of your gender, right? Like, we should all be peaceful. We should all be emotionally engaged, but we separate everything based on how we're socialized, right? The sociopolitics, we're socialized to be a certain way. I was talking to my pastor recently, and he and I don't see eye to eye theologically. I have evolved in a way that he's not coming with me all the way, but we still have these conversations all the time. And recently, and we've been talking about gender and sexuality. So I was explaining to him, like, how polyamory is a thing. And he was like, what is that? Right. And then he came back later, and we were having the conversation like a couple months later. And he said, now, before we go any further, what's that thing you was telling me about polyester? It was a polyester.
That's crazy.
So I'm like, dude, you wild. You wild.
Old black folks, they can't never get nothing right, but they always think they right.
I love it though. So we was talking, and we were having a conversation about gender and how we're socialized to perform our gender. And I said, think about it. We're socialized from before we get here. Like, we're socialized at the gender reveal party, because based on the gender of the child, that determines the color. We associate a color with a gender. So if you're a boy, we're going to put you in blue. We're going to put you in darker colors. We're going to put you in colors that we deem to be masculine. And then as you grow, we're going to buy you toys that we deem to be boyish toys. So if you're a boy, you got to play with action figures, not Barbies. If you're a boy, you got to play with race cars, not a cooking set. If you're a boy, we need to push you towards girls, because boys are supposed to like girls. And a lot of boys like all of these things, but not all of us do. But we're socialized in that direction. And my pastor was like, I don't see what's wrong with that. I said, there's nothing wrong with boys liking blue, action figures, and liking girls. The problem is when we force everybody into that mode. Because I'm one of those boys that likes blue. I like girls. I like boyish stuff. But when we force everybody into that mode, we don't allow them to show up as they are in the world. Mm-hmm. And we put all types of labels and attributes on masculinity that really we should just all strive to be as people. But we're socialized a different way.
I believe that. And I think it's very interesting because, like, the way that I see, I'm a little bit more confrontational in my approach, because I would have asked Pastor, I'd have been like, Pastor, how come we in the church, how come we teach women to be wives but not men to be husbands?
Yeah,
like that don't seem like something that's kind of odd to you. Like we focus a lot on women being wives, but we don't focus nowhere near as much as on men being husbands. And then when we turn around and we see what's going on in these households, because if you're doing any pastoral counseling, right? These men, they need direction. They need this help, Why? Because we're assumed at a particular rate that we already know how to do this simply because we're men, right?
Yeah.
Did anybody teach you how to be a father? Did anybody teach you how to be a husband? Did anybody teach you how to be a man, or did they just tell you what men do and expected you to follow?
The sociopolitics of it put us in that position. I mean, women could not provide for themselves legally in our society for a long time. Like, we're just now getting in this generation to a place where women have almost as much access to business capital and careers and all of that stuff that men do. But like my parents' generation, like my parents are baby boomers. Like, that's how it was. Men were supposed to be providers and women were supposed to be wives. Right. So now we're trying to evolve out of that. And some people are just stuck. You got some people who want the best of both worlds. Right. So you got men who still want to be treated like the provider, but they woman also got to work. They want to be treated like the head of the household, but both them and they woman both working all day. Then they expect a woman to come home and cook and clean. And then you got women who want, like, you know, I still want the man to provide, but I ain't doing all that cooking. Well, shit, like, some got to give. If you're gonna be sitting at the house all day and you got somebody to provide for you, it's too much to ask that it's a meal at the house. If that's your primary role in this relationship, like, but we evolving, we changing, and not everybody is getting with the evolution.
Brother Christian, I want you to tell the people where to find you, man, because I feel like this is a fantastic conversation, and I feel like they may need more of this deconstruction of the theology.
Yeah, connect with me on Instagram, TikTok is the Christian A. Smith. It's Kristian. So it's Christian with a K, the Christian A. Smith. And then you can check out mostly everything I got going on by going to holysmokesmovement.com. You can check out the podcast. You can join our digital community where we have these conversations every day. We actually got an event coming up in Chicago a week from today. Holy Smoke Chicago is next week. You can RSVP for that on the website. So yeah, holysmokesmovement.com. Connect with me there.
Most definitely, Brother Christian. And as always, y'all, good people, great people, God people, peace, love, soul, butter rolls. I'll see y'all next time, Brother Christian. Thank you so much for joining me in this space. Thank you so much for helping me out with this deconstruction of the sociopolitics of a male God. And we'll see y'all next time. Peace.